Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is JG Stahl. I head up partnership for the Americas at KNIME, and also have with me from KNIME, Steven Rauner. He's a solution engineer for the partner team, and you will can ask any questions of him at the Q&A if it's KNIME related. So very excited about today's session. It's going to be hosted by one of KNIME's partners, Day5 Analytics. They work with many customers across the Americas on financial use cases, but they're very experienced with KNIME, and they've created a set of components that enable business users to leverage the power of Snowflake from within KNIME, and that's without writing a single line of code. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Paras Gupta, founder and CEO of Day5 Analytics. Welcome, Paras.
Thanks so much, AG. Very happy to be here. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paras Gupta. I'm, as JG mentioned, CEO and founder of Day5 Analytics. And let's jump into this presentation. So we're here today to talk about KNIME and Snowflake and how business users can adopt the cloud. I'll talk a little bit about Day5 Analytics, KNIME and Snowflake individually and then together. And then we'll jump into the connectors that allow business users to use Snowflake from within KNIME, and we'll go into a live demo, which I think most of you will be very interested in seeing. So a little bit about Day5 Analytics. We focus on helping companies move their data along the evolution curve to a point where data can drive a revolution in the company. So really, we're helping companies try to get the most value out of the data that exists in their data stores today, as well as all the data that's out there that's available to them. We work with our clients to accelerate their data, their process, their trajectory along the data maturity curve. And we do this by getting into the business, understanding what they do, understanding the business, the problems, the processes, and then helping them to create solid data foundations. A lot of companies today are still struggling with some of the basic data elements, such as where the data is stored, accessibility, and even the team skills in order to use that data effectively. So we help with those, and we also help with deploying of custom solutions in a consultant fashion. So we follow a data evolution approach, which goes like this. The first part is strengthening and consolidating the data foundations of the companies. And we do this by coming in and looking at data engineering, helping consolidate the data together and making it accessible. The second piece is training staff to make them use the data more effectively. And a lot of this training is based upon KNIME and how business users can leverage KNIME to get the most value out of what exists in the company today, as well as all the tools and technologies that are out there today that KNIME can access. Third piece is automation. A lot of processes are still being done on spreadsheets or other tools which are not ideal for data processing. So we come in and we use tools such as KNIME to help the companies automate processes which make them more transparent, reliable, repeatable, and help with audit compliance in the case of financial situations. We also support business intelligence dashboards. That's dashboards like Power BI and Tableau and Click, and promoting consumable insights for business users. And finally, the end goal of the company is to get our clients to get to that point and to take advantage of advanced analytics such as data science, simulation modeling, and artificial intelligence. A lot of our data evolution approach is based upon sort of the tools and technologies available today. KNIME is a core component of what we use to help our clients get to this endpoint. So we have strong partnerships with KNIME and Snowflake. With KNIME, we're a certified KNIME-ready company. That means we can support an end-to-end deployment of KNIME. We have several use cases on the KNIME website, more targeted towards finance, but we also cover a broad range of other departments. We're an active contributor to innovation, and that's demonstrated by some of the components we've designed here today. For Snowflake, we're looking to push Snowflake adoption across the business. It's not just a database that is restricted to the IT domain of companies, but also business users can take really great advantage of Snowflake with its really simple to use interface and the connectors that we're about to show you. We help pair Snowflake with other high-performance tools like KNIME and various other tools that connect to Snowflake, such as the BI dashboards and H2O AI, which is an automated machine learning tool that also works really well with KNIME. And today we're going to talk about our custom KNIME connectors between Snowflake and KNIME. So in terms of the data challenges that we've seen with our customers so far, we've seen a couple of opportunities that have come up. On the first hand, business users today are much more technically savvy than they were 5 or 10 years ago. Many graduates coming out of schools are getting exposure to tools and technologies, and they're able to make more out of the data that's given to them than they could even a few years ago. The challenges they face is that internal to companies, they have data access problems. And a lot of this is stemmed off, traditional data warehousing tools that make it challenging for business users to get access. And the second piece is that business users, although they are the subject matter experts of the company, they may not be great at coding. So when we come to talking about data extraction using SQL, business users may struggle to get the most out of those data stores because they need to learn how to use SQL, and that may be a challenge for them. On the data side, we obviously, everyone is very clear on how much data exists in the world today. There's tremendous mountains of data everywhere. And the challenge then becomes, how do you use this effectively? Traditional data stores would operate in silos where you may have data stored for finance in one department, operations in another department, and marketing in a third data mart or some sort of storage area. And they all tend to be disconnected based on the traditional setup. So this makes it challenging to cross the borders and get all that data together in one place so that it can be put to good use. The other piece is how challenging it has been to get external data embedded into companies' internal sources and use that external data to get the most out of what's happening internally, but also what's happening externally, what other companies are making available in the marketplace. On the technology side, we see a lot of managed services coming up. Something as a service, you have infrastructure as a service, platforms as a service. These are a lot of cloud technologies that have come up and evolved over the last few years. And they offer a great opportunity for leveling the playing field between small businesses and big businesses. The challenges with all the tools, not only the cloud tools, but all the major technologies that are coming out today is, do they integrate well together? Do they integrate with your company's systems, and do they integrate with each other? And ultimately, as a company, your IT department is considering how much is this tool going to cost? What is the total cost of ownership? Not just the licensing cost and the usage cost, but also how much is it going to cost to train people to use this? How much is it going to cost to keep the lights on with this new technology in place? So these become considerations that can put a strain on progress when it comes to the new technologies out there. So we're just going to jump into a quick poll now. I'd really just like to get a sense of how many people are using KNIME and Snowflake. So if we can get that poll ready. So the poll will look like this. If you wouldn't mind taking a look at your polling questions. Great. Just give it a few more seconds and then we'll close the poll in about 10 seconds. Okay, so let's end the polling there. Okay, so here are the poll results. So a lot of people are using KNIME, not Snowflake. So I will talk a little bit more about Snowflake and give you an introduction to that. And maybe less so in terms of the KNIME Analytics platform. It looks like many people are very familiar with that. And we can talk a little bit about the KNIME server as well as we go ahead. Thank you for that information. Okay, so KNIME, it looks like about 80% of people on the call have exposure to KNIME Analytics platform. So I'll breeze through this, but for those of you that are new to KNIME, KNIME is an end-to-end data science tool, and it performs, what that means is it performs all sorts of data processing, connecting to various different data sources, transforming data, and then doing all the complicated data science processes that happen at the end, and then deployment finally. The way it works, it's a no-code visual interface, which makes it very accessible to business users. It has these nodes, which are these little boxes. Consider them as like little Lego building blocks. And each of these nodes performs a very specific task on data. And the way these nodes are used is they're put together to form a workflow. And what a workflow would do, it would take data and transform it. So in this case, it would read an Excel file, and then it would apply some colors to it. It would filter some rows, it would pivot it, and then it would send it to Power BI. But as you can see, it's very intuitive to follow what's happening at each stage. And as a workflow, it's very easy to audit what's going on and what's happening in places where it shouldn't happen. It's also very easy to change this. If this is not the right node, you can overwrite it. And that makes it very easy for business users who think in a process perspective, can build out a workflow that actually comes up with a pretty complicated calculation, as a result. And then finally, components are basically when you have a lot of nodes like this in a workflow, they get collapsed into something small, which can perform a task really, really well. And Day5 Analytics has gone ahead and designed some components that perform a lot of Snowflake tasks in one block without the user having to see what's happening under that. KNIME covers all stages of the data science lifecycle. As I mentioned, that means data connection to various different data sources, databases, Excel, the internet, API connectors, and then performs a bunch of big data processing techniques in database. For those of you that are familiar within database or not familiar with it, it means the processing happens within the database as opposed to being imported into your local KNIME Analytics platform. And that makes it accessible to high performance there. It does the transformations internally, it does data mining, visualizations, and then it allows you to deploy right within the platform. So KNIME comes as two major solutions. The first one is the KNIME Analytics platform. 80% of you are familiar with this. This is the open source platform that provides, tremendous capabilities. It's free to use, free to download. It allows users to blend and transform data and model and visualize it, and has a really strong community support as well as partner extensions and KNIME extensions and integrations. Following on from the KNIME Analytics platform is the KNIME server. This is the commercial enterprise version of KNIME that allows you to move things to production. In this case, it allows you to deploy from within the same platform and consume and interact through web portals, REST APIs, and various other interaction points. Snowflake, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Snowflake. So Snowflake is a cloud data platform that allows you to run a variety of workloads and applications at scale because it's a cloud platform. Workloads could include things like data warehousing, data science, data analytics, and applications could be all sorts of things like BI tools like Power BI, and automated machine learning potentially as well, if that's something of interest. So Snowflake works with all the different cloud providers, and it even works across different cloud providers. So if your company works with any of these cloud tools, it can work with all of them. It sits on top of these cloud platforms and is one of the big differentiators of Snowflake is how it breaks apart data storage from the computational power and from the application layer. So the centralized storage layer is where data is compressed and stored at scale, and allows you to connect to it through the application layer. The second layer here is the multi-cluster compute. And what this means is that you can have different computational powers assigned to different processes. If you're running a dashboard, you may need a different computational power to if you're running a machine learning algorithm. And so you can design different warehouses, as they call them, to allow you to access these underlying storage using a different compute setup. And finally, on the outside here, we have the cloud services, and these are really the user interface for how do you access the underlying storage and the compute. A lot of these components here at the cloud services layer are usable by IT, but they're also very user friendly for business users. And with our KNIME components, we're making this even simpler for business users to access. So we could get into things like security and governance, typically controlled by the IT departments. However, sharing and collaboration and transactional information, you could access these as a business user. So as individual softwares, the strengths are for KNIME, it's business friendly, no code required. It is extensively integrated with a bunch of open source tools as well as a bunch of your proprietary tools. Doesn't matter what your financial ERP and your financial systems are, your CRM systems, it will integrate pretty much with almost anything out there. It's got thousands of applications across finance, operations, logistics, marketing, HR, you name it. It's not a tool for one specific function. It can cover a broad range of applications. And then it also has that integrated deployment built in. So you can go from building a workflow to moving it to production really, really fast without having to chuck some code over the fence and having another department try to codify that as a production workflow. Snowflake offers the benefits of having one source of truth, breaking down those data silos that exist across companies and having one place where people can go to rely on for data. And that data is governed and controlled in a very secure fashion. It offers near zero maintenance as a service. This means that the amount of time that was typically spent on managing on-premises databases is not required for Snowflake because it offers this service. And it makes life very easy for IT departments as well as many people that use Snowflake. It's secure and performant. By performant, it really depends on how you leverage its compute setup, but it can handle computation at a lot faster rates than, let's say, on-premises small warehouses, small databases that may be created, because it can scale as that workload and the data increases. And the other great thing about Snowflake is it allows you to integrate with other data providers, and you're no longer reliant upon going out there and trying to search for a data provider that can give you demographics or weather data or whatever, because it's provided within the Snowflake cloud, and that can integrate directly with your applications within Snowflake. So when you combine KNIME and Snowflake together, the benefits you get out of this is that business users can leverage Snowflake without SQL code. They can mix what's stored in the Snowflake database with things that are ad hoc, like Excel files that may come from your stores who are not using databases and things like that, but submitting Excel files through email. And you can take these two things together and mix them together to come up with data sets you can apply for business intelligence and other things. It allows the subject matter experts to build the transformations and build the analytics. So what this means is that there's no more of that broken telephone being played between business users and IT departments in terms of what a business user is trying to get out of the data. The business user themselves can build it and deploy it. And obviously, they will need a little bit of IT support when it comes to security and setup. But for the most part, the business user can be self-sufficient. It's auditable and reusable, which is primarily due to how KNIME is set up as a tool with the building blocks. It's very easy to share, easy to change, and it's transparent. You can see exactly what's going on at each step of the process. And then it's nimble yet governed. So business users always want fast responses to questions. They want to be able to answer questions that they're asked without having to go and write a query and try to define a requirement to somebody else. And you can do this with KNIME, and you can do this with KNIME on top of Snowflake as the underlying data source. For IT teams that have invested in Snowflake already, this combination can help drive more adoption of Snowflake across the enterprise. We talked about cost before and how businesses are concerned about how technologies today are going to cost a lot of money. When you use a technology like Snowflake and you layer in KNIME, you're now able to get the most out of that investment that you placed into Snowflake. So how does this work? Well, I'm going to show a very high level of how this solution could fit. And this would obviously apply to each company's individual circumstances. And what would typically happen would be your finance tool and your ERP or pretty much any other tool. You may have IT write this data into the Snowflake data warehouse, for instance. Within this data warehouse, you have the data cloud. This is where other companies share their data. So you can access their data directly within Snowflake. And then you can use KNIME to process the data either within Snowflake, so using the power, the performance of Snowflake to process the data, either as a single click refresh or on a schedule with KNIME server. Or you could extract the data and then bring in ad hoc data sources like Excel files from your field staff who are not integrated into the database. And we'll show an example of how this may work with a coffee shop that is capturing beverage waste at the store level, but they want to incorporate that beverage wasted into the overall analytics for the company. So once that sort of ad hoc data source is married up with Snowflake data, it would write back into Snowflake, and that data would then be accessible as a data mart, where you would leverage tools like, let's say, Power BI or Tableau or Click. Various other tools could be accessible, accessing the data via Snowflake, because it's agnostic. It doesn't matter what you want to access the data with from Snowflake. So we're going to jump into the demo really quickly. If there's any questions, feel free to post them into the questions, and we'll try to take them quickly before the demo. We've designed six connectors or 7 connectors, which will help you interact with Snowflake and from within KNIME. So first one is input credentials. This is quite frankly just connecting to the Snowflake with your username and password. Second one is creating a warehouse. A warehouse is typically designed to run workloads. So you could design a small warehouse to run a small workload like reading a small table, or you might want to design a big warehouse to deal with lots of data, let's say sensor data, and processing of that. Creating of databases, this is where you may want to write your data into a database that's accessible for a BI tool. Reading data from Snowflake, and you could read it in either as a KNIME table or as an in-database stream. Loading data to Snowflake, you could load it either from a KNIME workflow or from an in-database node. And this is bulk loading, and it happens very, very fast within Snowflake. So you could load about 5 million rows in less than 30 seconds, which is very, very fast when you consider how long something like that would take to do with your traditional tools. And you could also append to existing tables. So if an existing table is there, this could be used to append additional rows to the table. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the demo workflow in a second. There don't look like there are any questions at this point. So what I'll talk about in the demo workflow is how you would connect to Snowflake with the credentials, create a warehouse, then create a database, load certain tables. And then the second part of this would be how to process this data from within KNIME. And it doesn't look like we have any questions. If they are, please ask, and we will get to them after the demo. So I'm just going to switch over to the demo right now. So we will be sharing a couple of workflows with you in the slide deck that will be shared after this call. The first workflow just has the individual components in them that I just described. And the second workflow is what I'm going to walk through today. So this workflow is designed, the first area is really just to help you with getting set up. And the second part down here is to allow you to play with the data from within KNIME and see the impacts in Snowflake. So the first node is loading off the input credentials, and it's fairly straightforward. You'd enter your name, your password, and the location of your Snowflake account. There is information for each of these components on the right side that would allow you to follow what's happening and how to structure sort of the inputs there. So with this, you would enter this information and run it. So you would right-click it and execute. And for those of you that are sort of getting an introduction to KNIME with this call at the same time, KNIME is basically, this is the canvas that you would design a workflow on. On the left here, this is your file explorer where you save different files and workflows. Your node repository, which is where each of these little components, as each of these nodes live. And you can drag and drop them onto the template. And on the right here is a description. If you click on a node, it gives you the description. And in this case, we ran the Snowflake input credentials. In order to run it, we right-click it and execute. And you'll see that the traffic light, the little traffic light there, changes from a red, what it was before, to a green. And once it's green, that means that the node has been run. So we've entered the credentials, and the next thing we're going to do is just jump into Snowflake. So you'll see here that this is my Snowflake account, the same account that I connected to. And I'll give you a very quick overview of what's happening here. You have warehouses. These are the ones which drive your compute and define how you're going to process the underlying data. You have databases, which are where your data is stored. You have the data marketplace. This is where the data from external vendors can be accessed very, very quickly. You have worksheets. These are typically where you would run SQL queries, but we don't need to run any for this exercise. And then you have the history, which shows you a lot of the technical things happening in the background, which if you're a business user, you don't need to worry about this, but it can be helpful if you're trying to bridge the gap between the business and the IT team. So what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to create a warehouse. And so I'm going to call this warehouse Coffee Warehouse because I'm dealing with a small exercise here. I'm specifying this as an extra small warehouse so it doesn't use a lot of credits. Each of these will leverage or use a different set of credits because it's using more compute power. We have an auto suspend time in here. So with Snowflake, if you don't use the warehouse, it shuts down. And so you basically want to limit how long it is kept running when it's not in use. So we can write this down to suspend in 15 seconds. We can also set it to auto resume. So if a query is run against a database, the warehouse can be triggered automatically. And then you can define whether you want to scale the warehouse with the types of queries you're running and what the minimum cluster and maximum clusters would be. This is another definition of how you want to scale the warehouse. So in this case, I'm just going to create a simple coffee warehouse, the simple warehouse called coffee_warehouse. So when I execute this, if I jump back into Snowflake and refresh this, you'll see that Coffee Warehouse has been instantiated. It turns off in 15 seconds. It is auto resuming. And this is now available for me to use as a warehouse for processing my data. The next thing I want to do is create a database. So I want to create a database. I just want to call it CoffeeDB, just for this use case that I'm running really quickly today. So when I execute that, again, right-click execute. And if I was to come into Snowflake, I see that CoffeeDB is now available. And if I come into this, I can see that CoffeeDB is available, but there's no tables within CoffeeDB. So as a database, it's an empty database. There's no real data stored in it. So the next thing I want to do is I want to load some sample data. So I've got some samples of transactions, about 50,000 rows that I want to load into a new table. So here I'm going to select the warehouse, the database. I'm going to name the table, and I'm going to name the schema. And as I can see here, there is a public schema, so I'm going to use the public schema. So when I run this activity here, so I'm going to load 50,000 rows roughly into Snowflake. And you'll see it processing here. When it turns green, if I was to come back to Snowflake and refresh this, I can see my transactions has been loaded very, very fast. And I can preview it here as well. Okay. Similarly, I'm going to load products and targets. Just the same thing, just a different table name. And even in this case, I'm just putting a different table name. So I just loaded products and targets. And if I flip back into Snowflake, I see products and targets are now loaded. Okay, great. So in reality, with your organization, you might have your IT team already define a data warehouse of some sort. So you may not need to do this, but this shows you sort of the process of how to load data into Snowflake. The next thing I wanted to show you is what can you do with data once it's in there. So I'm going to take, again, this input credentials node and execute it. And I just want to show you something that has changed over these two credentials. So the first one that I had done before, as you can see, it didn't have a coffee warehouse and it didn't have a coffee database. Once I loaded the warehouse and the database and the tables, and I ran this new one down here, you'll now see that I can now see a coffee warehouse and I can see a coffee database. So it's important to make sure that your components are showing the latest information that is in Snowflake. So I've processed two different streams of data here. The top one is showing how to process in database. This is using the power of the Snowflake compute to analyze that data, as opposed to bringing it locally and using your local power to do that. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to read two tables. I'm going to read the transactions table I just loaded and the products table I just loaded. And you'll notice that I'm reading these in database. So this, I didn't show you the read table in detail. I selected the warehouse I wanted to use. So again, warehouse chooses the power you want to apply to that. And I selected the table I wanted to read. At the bottom here, I have an option. Do I want to work in database? That's faster. It uses the Snowflake power and it uses the power of this warehouse to process. Or I can import it into KNIME, which opens up the whole bunch of KNIME nodes for me and allows me to integrate with other data sources outside of Snowflake. So I have this flexibility here. In this case, I just used the working in database, and that's why the KNIME type of table is canceled out. So once I read in these tables, I can now process them in database. And the question might be, why do you want to do this? Well, if I look at my transactions table, it's as you had seen before, it's about 50,000 rows long. It's quite detailed. It's really not ideal for quick summary or quick analysis, or it's not necessarily business friendly. You might want to create something that's business friendly, like a view. And so all I'm doing here is I'm summarizing this information into a view that a business user would find useful. And in this case, the view that I'm seeing is something like this. So it's much simplified. It aggregates monthly sales amount, monthly quantity, the year and the month, and sort of the targets. So much simplified from the initial transactions table I saw there. And then I want to load this table back in because I want to stick Power BI or Tableau on top of it and do a quick visual. So I can load this back into Snowflake. And again, when I say load it back, all of this data is being processed already within Snowflake. So this is, again, very, very fast. I'm going to execute this. And I loaded this into a table called InDB processing. And you remember from this that it was a very small table, about 12 rows. So if I was to flip back to Snowflake and refresh this, I can see my InDB processing here, which has got 12 rows in it. So I can now connect my BI tool to this InDB processing. I've got a nice view which a business user can use. They don't have to worry about product keys and things like that that are not business friendly. Like what is the customer ID? There's probably a customer name associated to this. So we can do a bunch of processing within database using this method. Alternatively, and this happens a lot, you may want to import data and blend external data that is not in Snowflake with the data that exists in Snowflake. And this can happen in a situation like we're demonstrating here, where a store, a coffee shop, is tracking waste units of a beverage. So they're capturing a daily record of how many pieces or how many units of these coffees and these teas were wasted because either they spoiled or the bag was open too long and it got air coming into it, whatnot. It was spilled on the floor for an example. So if a store is tracking something like this in an Excel sheet, this doesn't exist in Snowflake. But how do you leverage this field knowledge with your internal knowledge to forecast how much waste you should expect to see across your other stores? This is where you might want to read in your table as a KNIME workflow. So you can now blend external data with it. So you'll see here now, I'm not using the in-database processing node, I'm using the KNIME node. And I'm now going to be able to blend in this data source that does not exist within Snowflake. And this can be very powerful. If you think about the number of changes that occur over time externally, they don't always sit in the database. And it's not realistic to expect that everything that happens in the world to be in your Snowflake database. There's always going to be something external that you want to blend with. For a business user, this makes it super simple because they can stick in any data source here with KNIME being so open, whether that data exists on a CSV, an Excel file, on a cloud blob storage or something, you can still connect to it, even on a website. And you can still process that data. So I'm not going to walk through all this at this point, but essentially what's happening here is the waste units from this store are being calculated as a percentage of total sales, and that is then being applied across all the stores in that area, just to forecast how much waste should be expected across all the different stores. And you see here that we've, again, come up with a very simplified table, just for demonstration purposes, that takes how much waste was experienced in one store, which was store 3. And we've then applied that estimate across all the other stores in that district. If we wanted to, we could write this data right out into something like Power BI or Tableau with the integrated Power BI and Tableau nodes. Alternatively, you could do it that way if you want to do something very quick. You want to show your manager, look at what the forecast of the wasted units is based on store 3. You can stick that into Power BI and get a dashboard very, very fast, right? Once you've determined that that is the process you want to follow, you want to put this into something that's more production ready. So what you can do then is, instead of writing it to Power BI, you can write it back into Snowflake and use Snowflake as that data source for all your downstream reports, okay? And once you do something like this, you can take this workflow and deploy it onto the KNIME server and just let it run every day. It can go pick up a file that is stored in store 3's folder, pick up the waste units every day, take in the latest Snowflake information, blend it all together, come up with a new forecast for waste across the district, and load it into a BI table, which is then going to feed your Power BI and your Tableau and your Qlik dashboards. So if I was to do this, I'm going to write this into a KNIME processing table. And again, very, very quickly, you have the data in Snowflake. Okay, and this is, again, very simple example, but the objective here is to show that you can blend non-database external data sources with your Snowflake data and load it back into Snowflake to allow you to have a production-ready data source for BI reporting or any other analysis that you can think of. So with that's the demo there. But I'm going to switch back to the slides for a second. So these so what we can do next is just summarize sort of the strengths of what you just saw. So the first thing is, for the business users, they are very capable today. They can handle more data than they could in the past. There's less of a requirement for IT to build queries. And even IT teams, they've got a lot of interesting things that are coming up today that they want to get involved in. Running reports and running queries is probably the least favorite thing for them to be doing, I would believe. With this combination, these capable business users can now get access to their data, and they can use no code to run analysis on it. This is very powerful. It opens up the number of people in your organization that can take advantage of your data and come up with quick analyses that can really move the needle. In terms of data, the scale of data is going to keep exponentially growing. You now have a single source of truth within the Snowflake database that you've designed. It's designed by the subject matter experts who know the changes that are going to happen to the business. They're going to be able to be nimble as the business operations change, and it's not a hard-coded solution that is rigid and doesn't flex with changing times. But you still have a single source of truth that you can build your Power BI and Tableau and Qlik dashboards off, for example. The data marketplace is now fully accessible, as I showed you, within Snowflake. That can be blended within Snowflake, either in database or with importing it into KNIME and then running processes on it. There's no transfers of hard disks and file shares and challenging ways of getting external data. It's all done within Snowflake very, very easily. In terms of technology, we talked about near zero maintenance as a service. Snowflake is very easy to run. It's cheap to run. Doesn't require extensive IT resources to manage patches and things like that. It's integrated, as I showed you, between KNIME and Snowflake, and it also integrates, because KNIME is so open, integrates with a whole bunch of your systems in your company today. Because Snowflake is a pay-per-use, as soon as those warehouses are not being used, they can shut down. You pay per credit. And so you don't have to predefine how big you want your warehouse to be. If you want your warehouse to be tiny today, and you want your data storage to be tiny today, you can start tiny and you can grow to a massive scale very, very quickly without having to buy in advance for that massive scale today. So if you're ready to explore, we're going to share a couple of links on the chat in terms of how to connect to getting a free Snowflake account with $400 of credit. Connor, if you don't mind putting that into the chat, that'd be great. We're going to send the link for downloading the workflows we just showed you. Please note that the components have a 1-month expiry, so give them a shot, give them a try. Let us know if you have any feedback or questions. We'd be happy to take them. And as we work with KNIME very closely on this, we're looking to integrate your feedback and come up with something that incorporates what you'd like to see. And KNIME is working on building these components so they're accessible directly within KNIME in the near future. The appendix in the slide deck will show you how to set the Snowflake connectors up in your system. And then reach out to Day5 Analytics for more questions, whether it's KNIME and Snowflake and driving capability within your organization, how to deploy KNIME server and end-to-end KNIME processing and KNIME training. We do a lot of that too. Projects that you may have. Okay, so with that, I'm going to jump over to the questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Stephen, it looks like you have a couple of questions you want to answer live.
I think you may have just marked them as being answered live in general.
Okay, I will answer them. Okay, great. So I will take the first question. Questions from Derek. Are the Snowflake nodes available for use now? If so, what integration do we search for to install the Snowflake nodes? So we will send you the slide deck, the links that Connor has posted online. We're going to send you the slide deck after this. That includes information around the connectors themselves. You'll get the connectors. They will expire in a month, so give them a shot really quickly and see what you think. Get back to us with questions. It'll also show you how to install extensions within your KNIME platform to make Snowflake work. It's really simple. There's a couple of drivers you need to install in your KNIME preferences to make Snowflake work, and they're all freely available. So that we walk through step by step in terms of how to install Snowflake. As I mentioned, KNIME is building out the Snowflake connectors to be available directly within KNIME or through the hub in the near future. So keep an eye on that. And again, your feedback is going to be useful for us to consolidate what you would like to see out of those connectors. Okay, so the next question is, what happens when the nodes to create databases and warehouses in KNIME are reset and rerun? Okay, that's a good question. So if your warehouse already exists, your node will not allow you to overwrite that warehouse. What you would need to do is drop the warehouse, which is a very simple code. We can provide that. We haven't designed components at this point to drop warehouses, but it's a single one-liner to say drop the warehouse. Or even you could go into Snowflake, and I could show you that very quickly. If you wanted a new warehouse, let's just say you wanted your coffee warehouse to be resized, you could either drop it. So if you click this button, it would drop the warehouse. And if you look at the SQL code, it's a really simple SQL code. Again, we're not trying to, we want to make this as simple for business users, so we don't want to get into the SQL. But as I mentioned, the Snowflake interface is really user-friendly. So you could come in here and drop it. You could even come in here and reconfigure it if you needed to. And you can say, I don't want it to be an extra small, because now I'm processing not just a district, I'm processing the whole of North America. We have a lot more than 50,000 transactions. I need an extra large. So you could come in here and convert it to an extra large. So I think that answers Michael's question. Edgard asks, is Snowflake standalone as part of a cloud like AWS? So Snowflake it's an individual product. It works with all the different cloud platforms. So it can work on top of AWS, Azure, and I think it was Google as well. And it can also work across the three different clouds as well. So